Welcome to Bite-Sized Bios. This is meant to be a mini-sode that will accompany HDTH. Every week, I will pick a person from history and dive into their lives. All right, welcome back to another episode of Bite-Sized Bios, BSB. This week, we're going to be talking about Nelson Mandela, right? But before we get to that, as always, because this is a mini-sode of HDTH, we're going to talk a little bit about our last week's episode, which was windshield wipers. And it was one that I wasn't even sure I was going to be doing. I wasn't sure it had enough content to even be an episode, because I always thought that it was just that, you know, I thought I knew the whole story. It was definitely more. I thought it was always just that the woman made the windshield wipers, and when seeing, you know, there's snow on the windshield, we got to wipe it off, and you know, but you don't think about, and that's what the whole point of this is to be like, how did we get from that to Rain-X windshield wipers on your windshield right now? And the true answer is Trico. Trico is what gets us to the modern windshield wiper, and that story in itself is also very interesting, with the man who created Trico doing so after running over a guy on a bike. I don't want to say ran over, he knocked him over. I don't want to, you know, slander here. The guy didn't die, as we said, but yeah. So I don't think I missed much overall. I hope everyone had a Merry Christmas. And this will be coming out a couple days before New Year, so hope you all have a Happy New Year. Try to, you know, keep it between the lines and don't get too sloshed as we bring in 2023. I know if you're like me, you're hoping for better than what we've had these last 12 mesas. You know, I think that's months in Spanish, or is that table? I'm not sure. I'm giving myself away. I've got some big things planned for HDTH as we go into the new year. We may start having guests. I've got some people, I wouldn't say lined up, but I've had some interest with, some you will definitely not know, and others you will also definitely not know, but we're going to kind of hope to continue to grow here. We're going to expand onto other social platforms besides Twitter. I know right now that's all I really do, but I'm going to try to get it to Instagram and Facebook, and maybe even the god-awful TikTok. I guess you know how I feel about that. If you've read my blog, you know how I feel about that. We'll also start covering more dense and complicated topics as the time goes on. That was always the goal of this show, HDTH, was I wanted to get into the kind of the deeper stuff. We can talk like Islamic radicals, the caliphate or the transatlantic slave trade, just different. Even the idea of like really covering apartheid, which is something that's going to be a part of this next episode, but I just gloss over it because we're talking about biographies and Nelson Mandela, not just the actual idea of that. But so the idea was always to gain a kind of a solid foundation before shooting for anything that's in that level or controversial. So we haven't quite gotten there yet, but I'm going to start mixing in some different stuff that hasn't quite been what we've seen over this last year of like nights and bowling and signatures and GPS is going to start to just shift a little bit, but nothing's changing. We are only evolving. And the main goal at HDTH will always be to get to the core and find out how things happen. All right, now we're going to learn about Nelson Mandela. And like I said, I went into this not knowing much about the man, and I left knowing a great deal. So without further ado, here is the episode. Okay, let's talk Nelson Mandela. Or is that his real name? So, Nelson Mandela was born on July 18th, 1918, in a village called Mivezo in Umtata. Which just sounds, it's so fun to say, and that is in South Africa. He was actually given many names over his time. The first one, when he was actually born, the name was Roli Lalas, something like that. He says it's so easy. You watch him in the video say his own name, which obviously it should, but he, I just way butchered that. But that was his actual first name, and then That name actually means troublemaker and or shaker of trees. So kind of foreshadows what would come for him as far as how he would kind of try to shape a nation throughout his life. So his father's name is Godla Henry. There's another one in there. It starts with an M. I'm going to skip it. Couldn't even do it. And then Mandela, right? So he was a polygamist. He had 4 wives, right? 4 sons, 9 daughters, and they all lived in different villages. My man was holding it down. Right. So Nelson's mother, Godla, was the 3rd wife. Right. Her name was Sekini Fanny. She was the 3rd out of the 4. Not, they were in a row. They were all together. These were 4 wives, and I guess she was the 3rd one to get added to the crew. Sekini Fanny makes 3. And his family was actually of African royalty, which actually afforded him some of the best education in South Africa, even though he was African and not white, and we'll get into that a little bit. I'm not going to get too into the politics of this. All it's going to be more about how I do. If you listen to these bite-sized bios by now, we try to just cover the person. But back to what I was saying. So because of the place that his mother was in the marriage hierarchy, or at least because they say he would never have a chance of really actually taking the throne, like the actual throne of the African royalty of which he was a part of, because he was his parents had formed what was called a morganatic marriage, and that word is new to me, but it basically means it describes a marriage between two people of uneven ranks, and one of the parties is of a lower part of society, so the products of that marriage have no rightful claim to the kingdom. It's almost like an illegitimate child, but everyone acknowledges it. They just, that's all they do, really, is just acknowledge it. So both his parents were illiterate, but his mother was such a devout Christian that she sent him to a Methodist school when he was about 7 years old, where he was baptized, and that is actually where he was given the name Nelson, because as those teachers do, she couldn't pronounce his real name, which, I hear you, girl. I had trouble just a couple minutes ago, so Nelson sounds cool to me too, but he got that at the age of 7, and that's really going to be about all for his actual early life, his childhood. The last thing I'll mention, and recently I found this out towards the end of my research, but this man was circumcised at the age of 16. Ouch. With a spear. It's like an African tradition in his tribe, and whoa. So that's all I'll say about that. 16-year-old circumcisions sound horrific. He gets to college in 1939. He enrolls in the University of Fort Hare, where he receives his BA in politics. I really hope that to be true. It was really hard to find a lot of information about his undergrad time. I have articles, that I've read that mention that he went there, but never really kind of say out too much what he did. He definitely went to law school as well. But after he finished his undergrad time, he went back to his home village. And when he went there, they wanted him to really kind of be a part of the whole council of I don't know African tribe speak, but we wanted him to kind of be in the family, if we were going to put it, like the Sopranos. And he was kind of I'm not, and then when they wanted to give him a wife, and he was like, I can't, I don't really want to. So then he left, right? And he went to Johannesburg in 1941. And there he worked as a mine security officer. And then he actually completed his BA in 1943 when he came back to Fort Hare, the University of. He ended up studying at a few different law schools, but he went to the law school in Johannesburg, I believe they said, to actually get his law degree. He would go on to actually open up his own law firm, and he would also become active in the African National Congress, which is a lot of people call the ANC. And that would actually be later on the party under which he would run and become the president of South Africa. But we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. So in 1956, Mandela was charged with treason, but eventually the charges were dropped, and it was said that the charges were only created to distract the African Americans from participating politically, because this was starting to really, we're getting into what I would say, and I'm definitely no historian on this, but will be the real kind of precursors to bring about the end of apartheid, because the apartheid would end about 30 or 40 years, 34 years, I think, give or take. And I guess this will be a good time to just cover apartheid really fast. Just a quick definition for those who may be out of the loop. I know it's not everybody always knows about everything around the world. But so Wikipedia defines apartheid as a system of institutionalized racial segregation that existed in South Africa and Southwest Africa, which is present-day Namibia, from 1948 to the early 1990s. And it's basically kind of just like an African European slave story, the same way, not the same way, but America has theirs, South Africa has theirs, and they're actually, I was reading about it, and it's not really too, it's pertinent, and it's important to the overall bio that is Nelson Mandela, but it's not worth putting in all the facts here of apartheid. But definitely, if you have a chance, read about it. It is interesting. And now that will bring us to his time in prison, which was, to me, there's a lot of things that were difficult about, not difficult, but it's finding out exact information about his life was, it's hard to use another word besides difficult, but it wasn't easy. We'll do that. And I guess I'm sure I'd have to read a biography, and I watched some documentaries about it, and you get the information, but I don't know. So I say that to say this was the hardest part, I think, for me to actually get this, to make this actual part, to make this worthy of listening to, I think. So he was sent to jail in 1962. They say captured, arrested, basically for the idea of sabotage and conspiracy. And he was basically, for those were charges that the punishment was for hanging. And for a little while, he thought he was actually going to die. And there's a speech out there that he gives, I think not on the night before he thinks he's going to die, but I think a few nights before he thinks he's going to die. And it's very compelling. It's worth listening to. I would imagine, I would liken it to Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. And when I was watching all these documentaries about him and learning about his life, because I did not know, that's why I'm doing these bios. I don't know much about him. I know he's important, right? I know everybody wants to wanted to have a picture with him. And he's considered to be, a beacon of peace throughout the world. But I was always like, why? I don't know why. But so he basically, he goes to jail, and he was only supposed to go to jail for about 4 or 5 years. But then while he was in jail, they raided, I believe, either a home or a building of his, or not his, but they found some bomb making materials that they were able to track back to him through some channels. But that's what really led to, I've been made to understand, his actual life sentence. And so he was sent to live on Robben Island, which is, I believe they say, a Greek island off the coast of South Africa. And this was all around the time he was in his mid-40s. And while he was doing that, he was forced to do hard labor in a lime quarry, which they say was just futile, meaning I guess there was no actual reason for they weren't. I don't think they were actually mining lime. While he was behind bars, he continued to be an activist, and his wife Winnie was also led the struggle outside, and that's. All right, I had to break in here, just similar to how I did on last week's bite-sized bios, because I realized when I'm going back through here, putting the music in, that I left something out that's actually pretty important to his life. I normally do the family of the people that I've done for whatever reason. I was having such a hard enough time trying to compile information on the narrative of the life that is Nelson Mandela. I totally left out that basically he was married 3 times and had 6 different kids. I will try to just a little bit pronounce the names of his wives. So his first wife, her name was Evelyn. Evelyn Nitoko Mace, right? And they were married from 1944 to 1958. And then he married Winnie. Her name was Mandela, but her maiden name was Madikizela. It's pretty close to Mandela. And I didn't even know this. Little gem for you guys. I didn't know. And they were divorced in 96. So I thought that she was always the one that he was with. But it turns out he died being married to a woman named Graca Machel. And he had 7. Well, no. Okay, so he had 6 biological and one stepchild. So I was right about that. He had 6 kids. So married 3 times with 6 children. I thought that was just because I've heard of Winnie Mandela, but I've never heard of any of these other women. And I don't think I've ever heard of any of his children. But I thought we're trying to cover the whole topic here, so I had to break in, and now we're going to come back to remember where I was at just before I broke in. Was right when I was telling you about Winnie Mandela. All right, so we're going to go right back in and go.
2, 3, 4.
They ended up staying together throughout this entire time. That's pretty wild to me. And in 1990, he was actually released because the people in charge basically they decided to let all political prisoners out. There had been a large campaign over the last 10 years or so, maybe 15, to get everybody who had been detained for political reasons, basically pertaining to apartheid, to have them released, because people don't believe in apartheid, which they shouldn't. So it's like if apartheid's not legal or shouldn't be legal, then the people who are detained for having politically opposed it should also not be in jail. So they've been fighting that fight for a while, but it was actually finally they ended up happening in 1990. Cut to a few years later. In 94, he becomes the first black president of South Africa, and he did so, like I said, I believe under the ANC, the African National Congress, which is like their own party they have over there. He only served 1 term before stepping down in 1999. And after his presidency, which is really where I kind of became to know him as my own person, which is, like I said, not very much at all, but he was around. He was like The Rock or something like that. Not like The Rock, but I'm just saying that just, someone who is in society and everyone knows him at the time. I'm sure enough people still know him now. So this is, also maybe gonna hope you guys look at this with all the bite-sized bios. I hope you guys look at this and maybe want to go find more information about these guys, because obviously I'm not giving you the whole story. That's why they're bite-sized. but there's definitely more to this that I would hope you guys would want to go find. So see, after his presidency, he was definitely an advocate for peace. He even won, before his presidency, he won the Nobel Peace Prize in '93 for actually bringing democratic elections to South Africa. So I mean, he's always been a large part of the peace discussion internationally. And finally, before we get out of here for this bite-sized bios, I'll tell you how he died. He died of a respiratory infection at the age of 95. And that is Nelson Mandela, a bite-sized bio of Nelson Mandela. All right, that's been another episode of Bite-Sized Bios. As always, if you like what you heard here, you can always find more over at hdthappen.com. Where there you will find a written version of what you just heard, as well as photos and videos that help me create the episode. As always, I try to put the works cited up there so you guys know where I get my information from. And if that's not enough for you, you can also go over to the Twitter account that's also the same handle, hdthappen, at hdthappen, and then we just put up stuff that I find interesting, and also other links to things that have to do with the episode. And if you want, only if you'd like, you can go and give us 5 stars wherever you listen to your podcast. It always helps the pod grow. If you want to give us 5, that's great. As I always say, if you want to give us 2 and tell us why you don't want to give us 5, a little constructive criticism, I'm all for that as well. But yeah, as always, I think this is going to be the last episode before we, like I've said, we head into the new year. So happy New Year, guys! I appreciate everybody that's pressed play these last 12 months. This month has been the largest amount of downloads that I've had all year. So what that tells me is to keep going. I thought about if it was switched, if this is the smallest amount of downloads in 12 months, I probably would think, okay, what are you doing? Maybe you need to stop or change it up, which I'm always trying to change it up, but maybe you need to stop. But this is definitely, I've had by far the most downloads this month. So I'm hoping to just kind of transfer that same energy into the new year. You guys keep pressing play in 2023 and hoping for big things for HTTH. Thank you guys for pressing play, like I said, and we'll see you guys next year.